The champagne glass shattered at her feet. The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, cutting through the ballroom like broken glass through silk. Amelia stood there, 8 months pregnant, in an evening gown soaked in expensive wine, while the socialites around her dissolved into whispers and pointed fingers. Her hands were shaking, not from shame, from the effort it took not to destroy every single person in that room. Because they didn't know. None of them knew whose ring was on her finger, whose child was growing inside her, whose name she carried like a loaded weapon. But they were about to find out. Because somewhere across the city, a phone was ringing. And the man who answered it would burn the world down for her without blinking. Welcome to the Mafia codes, besties. If dangerous love stories make your heart race and your soul ache, you are exactly where you need to be. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let's get into this story together. You are not ready. This story is entirely fictional. All characters, names, and events are imaginary. The party had been a mistake from the beginning. Amelia Conti knew it the moment her friend Diane had talked her into coming. 8 months pregnant, swollen ankles, a back that ached from carrying the weight of the world, and a baby boy who apparently wanted to play soccer with her internal organs. The last thing she should have been doing was squeezing into the only formal dress that still fit her and attending the Harrington Foundation Gala, Chicago's most exclusive charity event of the season. But Diane had begged. Said she needed moral support, said it would be fun, said the food would be amazing. And Amelia, who'd been alone in the penthouse for 3 weeks while her husband handled business in Milan, had been desperate enough for human company to say yes. She should have stayed home. The trouble started the moment she walked in. She could feel the stares, the barely concealed judgment. A heavily pregnant woman alone at a black tie event. Without her husband. Without a name tag that meant anything to these people. Because that was the thing. These people didn't know her. Didn't know her name, her history, who she was before Lorenzo Conti had looked across a courtroom 5 years ago and decided she was his. In this world, she was just a woman with a big belly and no escort, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's cars but couldn't quite hide the fact that she was tired, alone, and very, very pregnant. Diane had disappeared almost immediately, pulled into a conversation with her boss near the bar. Which left Amelia standing near the appetizer table, sipping sparkling water and trying to look like she wasn't counting the minutes until she could go home. That's when Cecilia Harrington found her. Cecilia was the kind of woman who was beautiful the way weapons were beautiful. Elegant, precise, designed to cause maximum damage. She swept through the room in a silver gown that probably cost 6 figures, her social circle trailing behind her like a well-dressed entourage. She stopped in front of Amelia. Oh my! Her voice was perfectly calibrated. Loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. Soft enough to seem almost concerned. Are you sure you should be here, sweetheart? You look like you're about to pop. Amelia smiled pleasantly. I'm fine, thank you. Is your husband here? Cecilia's eyes did a slow, deliberate sweep of the room. Or did he send you alone? A woman in your condition really shouldn't be. My husband is traveling on business, Amelia said evenly. Oh. The syllable was loaded. Heavy with implication and barely concealed delight. Traveling. Of course. Cecilia exchanged a look with a woman beside her, one of those looks that said everything without saying anything. Well, it's very brave of you to come out. In that dress. The woman beside Cecilia, all sharp angles and sharper judgment, let out a barely concealed laugh. And that laugh, small and careless and cruel, was what knocked the champagne flute out of someone's hand. Amelia would never be entirely sure whose elbow caught the glass, only that one moment it was fine, and the next cold champagne was cascading down the front of her dress, soaking through to her skin. The laughter that followed was immediate. Amelia stood perfectly still while it washed over her. She was 31 years old. She'd grown up poor in a small apartment in Detroit, raised by a mother who'd worked double shifts so Amelia could go to law school. She'd clawed her way to a junior partnership at one of Chicago's most prestigious firms. She'd survived things that would have broken most people. She was not going to cry in front of Cecilia Harrington, but her hands were shaking, and her eyes were burning. And the baby chose that exact moment to deliver a particularly brutal kick, and pain shot through her lower back and she couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, could only stand there while the laughter continued and the stares multiplied and she felt more alone than she had in years. Someone should call her a cab, Cecilia said, voice dripping false sympathy. Poor thing. Clearly in over her head. Amelia opened her mouth, closed it, because what she wanted to say would have started a war, and she was 8 months pregnant and her back was screaming and she just needed to get out of this room before the tears she was holding back finally broke through. She turned, walked toward the exit with her head up and her spine straight, found a bathroom down a quiet corridor, locked herself inside, and sank onto the small settee near the vanity. Pressed her hands against her face, let herself shake for exactly 60 seconds. Then she pulled out her phone and called Lorenzo. He answered on the first ring. He always answered on the first ring when it was her. Amelia. His voice was warm and immediate, the Italian accent that still made her pulse skip even after 5 years. Tesoro, what's wrong? And just like that, the tears she'd been holding broke through. She tried to speak calmly, tried to explain what had happened, but the words came out broken and wet and nothing like the composed woman she usually was. Lorenzo didn't interrupt, didn't rush her, just listened, and she could feel the change in him through the phone, the temperature dropping, the silence becoming something dangerous and absolute. Give me a name, he said when she finished. Lorenzo, don't. A name, Amelia. Please don't do anything. I'm fine. I just needed to hear your voice. I'm going to go home and… You're not going home yet. His voice was gentle but absolute. I need you to go back to the party. Find somewhere comfortable to sit. Drink some water. And wait for me. Amelia blinked. You're in Milan. I was in Milan, Lorenzo said. I'll be there in 4 hours. Don't leave. Promise me. Lorenzo, you can't fly from Milan to Chicago because someone spilled champagne on me. They humiliated my pregnant wife in public. The gentleness was gone now, replaced by something cold and carved from stone. I can. I will. And when I get there, Cecilia Harrington is going to understand the magnitude of her mistake. Amelia closed her eyes. This was the man she'd married. The one who'd held her hair back when morning sickness destroyed her first trimester, who read Italian lullabies to her stomach every night, who learned 3 different breathing techniques to help her through labor preparation. The man who was currently, apparently, going to rearrange his entire schedule and cross an ocean because someone had laughed at her. You're impossible, she whispered. I'm your husband, he said simply. Go back to the party. I'm coming. She believed him. The next 4 hours were strange. Amelia dried her face, straightened her dress as best she could, and went back to the ballroom. Found a comfortable chair near the back, accepted a glass of water from a passing server, and watched the party from a distance. Diane found her, horrified by what she'd missed, hovering with apologies and indignation on Amelia's behalf. Amelia let her friend fuss, grateful for the company, but her mind was somewhere over the Atlantic. Around midnight, the energy in the room shifted. It was subtle at first. The way conversations paused near the entrance. The way security straightened. The way the maitre d' moved with sudden purpose toward the door. Then Amelia saw him. Lorenzo Conti walked into the Harrington Foundation gala like he owned it, because in every way that mattered, he did. He was 42 years old, jet black hair with the first threads of silver appearing at his temples, broad-shouldered, tall, wearing a suit he'd clearly changed into on the plane, and radiating the kind of authority that made rooms go quiet and people step back instinctively. His eyes found her immediately. Across the entire ballroom, through the crowd of Chicago's most powerful people, his gaze cut straight to her like a compass finding north. He crossed the room without acknowledging a single person who tried to stop him. Not the foundation president who reached for his hand. Not the senator who called his name. Not the 3 different business associates who moved toward him with hopeful expressions. Lorenzo walked through all of it like it didn't exist, his focus entirely on Amelia, and when he finally reached her, he dropped to one knee in front of her chair and took both her hands in his. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice low. "Lorenzo, I told you I was fine." "Are you hurt?" He was looking at her face, reading it the way he always did, searching for the truth beneath the composed surface she showed the world. "My back," she admitted quietly. "It's been aching, and the baby's been moving a lot. I think the stress. Then we're leaving. But first." He stood, and the warmth in his expression cooled into something that made Amelia almost feel sorry for whoever was in his sights. He turned to the room. The ballroom was watching. Of course it was. The entire room had stopped pretending not to stare. Lorenzo Conti's arrival, his obvious journey, his very public display of concern for his pregnant wife, had made every other conversation irrelevant. Lorenzo's eyes found Cecilia Harrington. She was standing 20 feet away, champagne glass frozen in her hand, face going through several rapid shades of pale. Lorenzo took his time walking to her. Each step slow and deliberate, the kind of movement that said he had all the time in the world and everyone else could wait. Cecilia tried to compose herself. "Mr. Conti, I didn't realize." "I know you didn't." His voice was quiet, conversational, all the more dangerous for it. "That's the problem, Mrs. Harrington. You saw a pregnant woman alone and made assumptions. You used her as entertainment for your social circle. You humiliated her." He paused. "You humiliated my wife." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. "I wasn't aware," Cecilia started. "No, you weren't. Which I find remarkable." Lorenzo tilted his head slightly. "The Harrington Foundation receives substantial funding from Conti Holdings. Your charity auction next spring is hosted in a venue my company owns. Your husband's development project on the north side is currently pending approval from a committee that includes 3 people who take my calls." He let that sit for a moment. "Did you know any of that, Mrs. Harrington?" Cecilia's face had gone from pale to gray. "I flew from Milan tonight," Lorenzo continued, his voice never rising above conversational, "because my wife called me upset. My pregnant wife, who is 8 months along with our son, who came to your event in good faith, was made to feel humiliated and unwelcome. So I want you to understand something clearly. Whatever social currency you thought you gained tonight, whatever entertainment you got at her expense, you paid for it at a price you haven't calculated yet." He turned away from Cecilia like she no longer existed, walked back to Amelia, and offered his hand. "Ready to go home, tesoro?" Amelia took his hand, let him help her up, felt his arm come around her waist, warm and steady and solid. She leaned into him slightly, just enough to let him know how much she'd needed this. As they walked out, she heard the silence behind them give way to whispers. But they were different whispers now. Not cruel. Not amused. Awed and nervous and full of the dawning realization of what they'd all just witnessed. In the car, Lorenzo held her against his side, his hand moving in slow circles on her back exactly where it ached. "You flew from Milan," Amelia said. "I'll always fly from Milan. Or Tokyo. Or the moon. If you call me, I come." His lips pressed against her hair. "That's not negotiable. Our son is going to think normal husbands fly across oceans on 4 hours' notice. Our son is going to know that when someone you love is hurting, you don't sleep until they're safe. There are worse lessons." Amelia closed her eyes, listening to his heartbeat. "I missed you. I missed you too. 3 weeks was too long. His arm tightened around her. I'm not leaving again. Not until after the baby comes. I already told them in Milan. Lorenzo, you have business. I have a wife who's 8 months pregnant and a son who's coming into the world in 4 weeks. Everything else can wait. He pressed his lips to her temple. You and this baby are my business. My most important business. Everything else is just money. Amelia laughed softly. Coming from the man who ran one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Europe alongside a legitimate empire spanning 3 continents, the words were extraordinary. And she believed every one of them. The next morning, Amelia woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee and Lorenzo sitting on the edge of the bed watching her sleep with an expression that made her chest ache with love. How long have you been watching me? She asked. An hour, maybe. You looked peaceful. I didn't want to wake you. He handed her the coffee he'd made exactly the way she liked it, which after 5 years he knew better than she did. How's your back? Better. He moved last night, seemed calmer. She put her hand on her stomach, felt the baby shift in response. He always calms down when you're around. Lorenzo put his hand over hers, and when the baby kicked against their joined palms, the look on his face was something she'd carry with her for the rest of her life. Strong, Lorenzo said quietly, almost to himself. Like his father. Better than his father. He looked at her, and there was something raw in his eyes. I want him to be better than me, Amelia. Better than everything I came from. I want him to grow up knowing that strength doesn't mean cruelty, that power doesn't require destroying other people. Amelia set down her coffee, touched his face. This was the conversation they'd been circling for months, the one that lived underneath all the other conversations. Lorenzo Conti, feared across 3 continents, was terrified of becoming his own father. You're already better than him, she said quietly. You've been better since before I knew you. The man your father was would never have flown from Milan because his wife had a bad night. The man your father was wouldn't know his wife's coffee order or her favorite book or the fact that she needs someone to sit with her in silence when she's overwhelmed. You're not him, Lorenzo. You never were. His jaw worked. I've done things. I know what you've done. I've always known. I married you with my eyes open. She held his gaze. But I also know who you are when the business is stripped away. And that man, the one sitting here watching me sleep and holding my coffee and terrified of failing our son, that man is the best person I know. The breath he let out was shaky. He pressed his forehead against hers. What did I do to deserve you? He murmured. You chose me, she said simply. That courtroom, 5 years ago. You could have had anyone. You chose me. I didn't choose you, Tesoro. I recognized you. There's a difference. That afternoon, Lorenzo's world started bleeding into their quiet morning. His second-in-command, Nico, called 3 times before Lorenzo answered, and when he did, Amelia watched his face shift into the other man, the public man, the one the world feared. He moved to the balcony to talk, and Amelia watched through the glass, could tell from the set of his shoulders that something was wrong. When he came back in, he sat beside her and took her hands. There's a problem, he said. Tell me. The Ferrano family. Old enemies. They've been quiet for 2 years, but Nico says they're moving. Making overtures to our people, trying to pull loyalty. And there are rumors. He stopped. Rumors about what? About you. About the baby. That I've gone soft because of you, that I'm distracted, that I won't respond the way I would have before because I can't afford to be reckless with a pregnant wife and a son coming. His jaw tightened. They think you're a vulnerability. Amelia was quiet for a moment. And am I? No. His voice was absolute. You're not a vulnerability. You're what I'm protecting everything for. There's a difference. He paused. But they're going to test that theory. I need you to know that. They might try to get to me through you. I've been your wife for 4 years, Lorenzo. This isn't the first time someone's tried to use me. You were pregnant before. It's different now. The fear in his eyes was real and raw and nothing like the face he showed the rest of the world. I can't think clearly when it comes to you. I never could. If anything happened to you, to the baby. Nothing's going to happen. She squeezed his hands. You have more security than most heads of state. And I'm a lawyer who spent 4 years learning exactly how your world works. I'm not naive or helpless. I know. But I need you to be careful. Extra careful. Until this is handled. And how are you going to handle it? Lorenzo's expression settled into something cold and certain that reminded her exactly who she'd married. The way I handle everything that threatens my family. The week that followed was a strange combination of domestic peace and escalating tension. Lorenzo worked from the penthouse, conducting his business through encrypted calls and late-night meetings that Amelia politely pretended not to notice. During the day, they were just themselves. He drove her to prenatal appointments, sat through breathing classes looking impossibly serious while the other expectant fathers giggled, spent evenings assembling the crib that had been sitting in its box for weeks. Amelia watched him drill tiny screws into mahogany with the same focused intensity he used for everything else, tongue between his teeth in concentration, and thought that she had never loved anyone more in her life. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "I'm allowed. You're my husband. You're smiling like I'm doing something ridiculous. You're assembling a crib." Lorenzo Conti, who once made 3 different governments nervous in the same calendar year, is sitting on a nursery floor following instructions from a picture booklet. He looked up, and the smile he gave her was real and rare and devastating. The instructions are badly translated. I'm improvising. That's what worries me. He threw a pillow from the nearby rocking chair at her, and she caught it laughing, and for that moment everything was perfect. Just them. Just this. 3 days later, the Ferrano family made their move. It wasn't dramatic. It never was, in the beginning. Just information, carefully placed. A package arrived at the penthouse, no sender address, intercepted by security before it reached Amelia. Inside was a photograph. Her at the gala, soaked in champagne, looking alone and vulnerable. And a note. Even the most dangerous men have a weak point. We found yours. Lorenzo read the note twice, set it down, and made one call. When the call was done, he came to find Amelia in the nursery, where she was folding tiny onesies and pretending she wasn't scared. "You saw the package," she said. "Nico told me. What are you going to do?" "I've already done it." He leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "Arrangements have been made. The people who sent that note are going to have a very difficult few days. Their shipments, their banking, their carefully constructed alliances. Everything they've built in the past 2 years is going to start falling apart in ways they can't explain." Amelia looked at him. "Without any of it tracing back to you." "That's the point. They threatened my pregnant wife. I'm not going to war. I'm going to bankrupt them, isolate them, and make sure every family on the East Coast understands they're untouchable." His voice was measured. "By the time I'm done, they won't be able to find allies willing to accept their phone calls." It was surgical, precise, devastating in its patience. This was what the world didn't understand about Lorenzo Conti. He didn't operate through brute force. He operated through intelligence, through leverage, through the careful accumulation of power used exactly when it would be most effective. The violence that underpinned his world was always the last resort, never the first. But the Ferranos didn't know that, and they made another move before Lorenzo's quiet war could fully take effect. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. Amelia was at her obstetrician's office for a routine checkup, a simple appointment she'd kept alone because Lorenzo was in a meeting that couldn't be interrupted and the appointment was supposed to take 30 minutes. She had security in the lobby. She had her phone. She was 8 blocks from home. She never made it back to the car. 2 men, professional, appeared from nowhere in the parking structure, moved with practiced efficiency. Amelia fought, screamed, scratched one of them hard enough to draw blood and broke her heel kicking the other. But there were 2 of them and 1 of her, and she was 34 weeks pregnant, and they had zip ties and a van. The whole thing took 4 minutes. In the van, hands bound, she pressed herself into the corner and thought clearly. She was terrified. Of course she was. Every instinct she had was screaming. But beneath the fear was something steady. Something that knew, with absolute certainty, that Lorenzo was going to find her. Was already trying to find her. Would level the entire city if that's what it took. So she focused on what she could control. Kept her breathing even, for the baby. Memorized what she could about the route through the van's small rear windows. Counted turns. Watched for landmarks. When Lorenzo's phone rang and his security chief told him Amelia was gone, something happened in him that he had no name for. Not rage. Rage was something he knew, something he could control and direct and weaponize. This was different. This was the total obliteration of every carefully constructed wall he'd ever built around himself, replaced by something primal and absolute. He stood up from the meeting. The men in the room, men who had seen Lorenzo Conti in the worst circumstances of his professional life, who had seen him cold and lethal and utterly composed in situations that would have broken ordinary men, these men took one look at his face and leaned back in their chairs. "Clear the room," Nico said quietly, and people moved. When it was just them, Lorenzo stood at the window and breathed for exactly 30 seconds. Counting, finding the center, because he was no use to Amelia if he fell apart now. "Find her," he said. "Every resource. Every contact. Legal and otherwise. I want a location in 2 hours. Lorenzo." 1 hour and 50 minutes now. He turned from the window. "And Nico? When we find her, and we will find her, the Ferrano family stops existing. Not just their business. Them. I want them gone from this city, this country, this world. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Nico understood. "Yes. Good. Then go." Alone, Lorenzo allowed himself exactly 1 moment of pure terror. 1 moment where he let himself feel the possibility he refused to speak out loud. Then he locked it away, picked up his phone, and went to work. 2 hours and 11 minutes later, he had an address. He went alone. His security team argued, his men argued, Nico argued loudest of all. Lorenzo listened patiently, then went alone anyway. Because the Ferranos had taken his wife. His pregnant wife. His child. And no one was going to take that from him, not even the people who worked for him. The warehouse was on the south side, near the water. Lorenzo moved through it with a clarity he hadn't felt in years, everything stripped away except the single point of purpose at his center. He found Amelia in a back room, tied to a chair but otherwise unharmed, facing 2 men who were clearly more scared than she was. The look on her face when she saw him, relief and love and fury all mixed together, told him everything he needed to know about her state of mind. The 2 men who'd been watching her took one look at Lorenzo's expression and made the very wise decision not to resist. Lorenzo cut Amelia free himself. His hands, steady through everything else in his life, shook slightly as he worked through the zip ties. When she was free, she stood, threw her arms around him, and held on. He held her back. Held her like she was the only thing keeping him upright, which was exactly what she was. "I counted turns," she said against his chest. "In the van. I was counting, trying to figure out where they were taking me. 14 right turns and 7 left after the highway exit." A laugh tore out of him, unexpected and raw. Of course she had. Of course his wife, 8 months pregnant and zip-tied in a van, had spent her time methodically gathering information. He loved her so much it was almost unbearable. "Are you hurt?" he managed. "No. Scared. Angry. The baby's been kicking like crazy since they grabbed me." She pulled back enough to look at him, and her eyes went wide at whatever she saw on his face. "Lorenzo, I'm fine." "You're not fine. You look like you aged 10 years in 2 hours." "I might have." He cupped her face, pressed his forehead against hers. "Don't ever do that again." "I didn't exactly volunteer." I know, tesoro. I'm sorry. I just need a moment." He closed his eyes. "I need a moment where I can feel that you're real and here and safe. Please." Amelia softened, put her hands over his. "I'm here. I'm real. We're both fine. The baby's fine. You found us. I'll always find you. I know." She kissed him softly. "Now take me home. I'm exhausted, I'm hungry, my back is killing me, and your son has been using my ribs as a xylophone for the past 2 hours." He laughed again, more steadily this time. "Let's go home." Outside, his security team was waiting. Lorenzo kept his arm around Amelia the entire way to the car, and when they were settled in the back seat, he didn't let go. Held her against his side, his hand moving in slow circles on her back, and stared out the window at the city lights. "The Ferrano family," Amelia said. "Handled. Lorenzo. They won't hurt you again. They won't hurt anyone again." His voice was quiet, absolute, no room for argument. "I made a choice a long time ago about the kind of man I was going to be. I've been trying for years to move away from the worst of it, to build something legitimate, something I could hand to our son without shame. But I will never, never apologize for protecting my family. That's not something I'm willing to become more civilized about." Amelia was quiet for a moment. "I'm not asking you to apologize. I know. I just need you to understand." "I understand everything. I've always understood everything." She put her hand over his. "You're a complicated man in a complicated world, and I knew that when I married you. I don't need you to be simple. I just need you to come home." He pressed his lips to her hair. "Always. That's a promise I'll never break." The days that followed were both tense and tender. Lorenzo dismantled the Ferrano operation with the systematic precision he brought to everything. Within a week, their allies had turned, their resources were frozen, and their leadership had made the sudden decision to relocate permanently to another country. Quietly, quickly, with the distinct impression that staying would be significantly worse than leaving. Chicago's underworld settled back into its uneasy order. The Conti name, already respected, acquired a new layer of something. Not fear exactly. Something closer to reverence. Because the story spread, the way these stories always spread, in whispers and careful words over expensive dinners and in the back rooms of places that didn't have names on their doors. Lorenzo Conti had crossed an ocean because his wife had a bad night at a party. Had gone alone into an armed warehouse because someone touched his pregnant wife. Had dismantled an entire operation in under a week not because of business or territory or pride, but because of love. Some people thought it made him weak. Those people, over the following months, would quietly learn their mistake. 2 weeks after Amelia came home, with the city settled and the threat neutralized, Lorenzo brought up the future. They were in the nursery. It was becoming their favorite room. This small space full of soft colors and tiny things, the most honest room in their enormous penthouse. Amelia was sitting in the rocking chair, and Lorenzo was on the floor, having gone back to finish the mobile he'd started and abandoned during the crisis. "I've been thinking," he said, concentrating on the delicate mechanism of the mobile. "That's dangerous," Amelia said. "About the business. About everything." He set down what he was working on, looked at her. I want to finish the transition. Completely. The last of the old operations, the things I've kept running because letting them go felt like admitting defeat. I want them gone. Legitimate or closed. No middle ground. Amelia stopped rocking. That's a big decision. Our son is coming in 2 weeks. I've been using the transition as a process for 4 years, moving slowly, keeping options open. But that's not good enough anymore. His eyes were steady. I want him to grow up with a father whose business he can understand, who he can come to work for if he wants to without needing to know things that shouldn't be in a child's head. I want him to be proud, not scared. And your people, Nico, the others, what happens to them? I've already talked to Nico. He's with me. The ones who want out will get packages. The ones who want to stay will shift to the legitimate side. It's not without risk. There are people who won't like it, who'll see opportunity in the gap. He paused. But I have enough legitimate power now that the risk is manageable. What I don't have is infinite time to make the choice. Amelia looked at him for a long moment. You've been thinking about this since the warehouse. I've been thinking about this since I found out you were pregnant. He stood, came to kneel in front of her chair, took her hands. I meant what I said the night I found you. I will never apologize for protecting you. But the best protection I can give our son isn't a security team or a reputation. It's a clean life, a future he can be proud of. She raised her hand, touched his face. Then do it. I'll support you through every hard part of it, whatever it costs, whatever it takes. It might get difficult. There'll be people who push back, who test the transition. Lorenzo. She waited until he looked at her. I'm your wife. I'm not here for the easy parts. I'm here for all of it. That's what I signed up for. That's what I want. He turned his face into her hand, kissed her palm. Ti amo, Amelia. God, I love you so much. I love you too. She smiled. Now fix that mobile. It's crooked. His laugh echoed off the nursery walls, warm and real, filling the small room with the sound of a man who'd spent decades behind walls finally letting them down. Lorenzo Conti's son arrived on a rainy Thursday morning, 3 days before the due date, with no patience for schedules, which Lorenzo would later say was his best proof that the boy was his. The labor was long, and Lorenzo stayed beside Amelia through every minute of it, holding her hand with both of his, talking to her in a steady mix of English and Italian that she would later claim was incomprehensible but somehow perfect. He never left. Not for food, not for the phone calls that came in despite everything, not for anything. When the baby finally arrived and the cry filled the delivery room, Lorenzo made a sound that Amelia had never heard from him before. Something that had no name, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, somewhere between relief and wonder and a love too enormous for the human body to contain quietly. The nurse placed the baby in his arms, and Lorenzo Conti, who had faced down governments and crime families and enemies across 3 continents without flinching, stood there holding his newborn son and shook. Amelia watched him, memorized the exact lines of his face in that moment, the way the overhead light caught the tears he wasn't bothering to hide, the way his arms formed a cradle like instinct had taken over from the first second, the way he looked down at his son like he was seeing something he'd given up believing in. He has your eyes, Lorenzo said, voice wrecked. He has your stubbornness, Amelia said softly. He came 3 days early because he couldn't wait. Lorenzo laughed, wet and unsteady, looked up at her, and the expression on his face was everything. Every year they'd been together, every fight and fear and tender moment and choice they'd made, it was all right there, in the open, nothing hidden. Thank you, he said. Just that. Simple and enormous. Thank you, she said back. They named him Marco. Lorenzo Marco Conti. After Lorenzo's grandfather, the one decent man in a long line of complicated ones, the one he'd measured himself against his entire life. It felt right. It felt like a beginning. 6 weeks after Marco came home, when the sleepless nights had settled into exhausted rhythm and the penthouse had transformed from a bachelor's monument to something warmer, messier, alive, Cecilia Harrington requested a meeting. Lorenzo read the request and looked at Amelia over his coffee. "She wants to apologize," he said. "I know. Diane told me. Do you want to meet with her?" Amelia thought about it. Thought about standing in that ballroom, soaked and shaking, feeling more alone than she had in years. Thought about what it had felt like to be made small for the entertainment of people who didn't know her name. "Yes," she said. "Actually, yes. I want to meet with her." The meeting was brief. Cecilia Harrington arrived at the penthouse, and if she was expecting the same woman she'd dismissed at the gala, she found someone quite different. Amelia met her in the sitting room, Marco asleep in the nursery upstairs, calm and comfortable in her own home. Cecilia apologized. Genuinely, it seemed, which Amelia hadn't entirely expected. Said she'd been thoughtless, had behaved badly, that she was sorry. Amelia accepted it. Not because she'd forgotten, but because she understood that carrying a grudge required energy she'd rather spend on her son. "I want to ask you something," Amelia said as Cecilia was leaving. Cecilia paused. "The women in that circle, the ones who laughed, some of them are connected to your foundation, yes?" "Yes. The Conti Foundation is starting a maternal health initiative next year, funding prenatal care for women who can't afford it. Safe spaces for vulnerable pregnant women." Amelia held her gaze. "I'd like your foundation to partner with it. Your reach in the philanthropic community would help enormously." Cecilia stared at her. "You're asking me to partner with you? After everything?" "I'm asking you to do something useful with your influence. The women you laughed at that night, the ones who come to events alone because their husbands are working or absent or gone, those women deserve better than what they get from rooms like that one. Help me change that." A long moment. Then Cecilia nodded slowly. "Yes, I think I can do that." After she left, Lorenzo appeared in the doorway. He'd been listening. She'd known he was listening. "You turned your humiliation into a maternal health initiative," he said. "It seemed like a waste not to." He crossed the room, pulled her into his arms. "You're extraordinary. Do you know that?" "I'm practical," she corrected, but she was smiling against his chest. "Both," he said. "Extraordinary and practical. My favorite combination." A year later, the Conti Foundation's Maternal Health Initiative had funded prenatal care for over 2,000 women in the Chicago area. Amelia had returned to law practice part-time, specializing in cases that actually needed her help rather than the corporate work that had once paid her bills. Lorenzo had completed the business transition, and the Financial Times had run a piece on Conti Holdings as a case study in successful enterprise restructuring. The piece did not mention his previous life. That was the nature of Lorenzo's world. Some things stayed unwritten. Marco was 1 year old, walking enthusiastically and poorly, leaving a trail of destruction through every room he visited. He had his mother's eyes and his father's determination and the combined stubbornness of both parents, which meant the next 20 years were going to be spectacular and exhausting in equal measure. On Marco's first birthday, Lorenzo and Amelia stood together in the garden of the house they'd bought in the suburbs, having made the unanimous decision that a penthouse and a toddler were not a sustainable combination. Marco had cake in his hair and on his father's expensive shirt, which Lorenzo appeared completely unbothered by, because in the past year he had developed an extraordinary tolerance for the specific chaos that small children bring to carefully ordered lives. Amelia watched her son smash cake with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting for this moment his whole life and leaned against her husband's shoulder. "A year ago tonight," Lorenzo said quietly, "I was standing in a hospital holding something impossible and trying to understand how my life had produced something so entirely perfect. A year ago tonight I was recovering from 18 hours of labor and ready to never speak to you again for being responsible for it. You said you loved me 6 times in those 18 hours. Painkillers. He laughed, kissed the top of her head. Amelia. I need to tell you something. She looked up at him. The expression on his face made her straighten slightly, the old instinct for paying attention when Lorenzo used that particular tone. He reached into his jacket pocket, brought out a small box. Amelia's brow furrowed. We're already married, she said. I know. But I did it badly the first time. Proposed in a car at midnight with no ring, no preparation, no romance whatsoever. He opened the box. Inside was a ring that made her breath catch, not ostentatious, nothing she'd expected from a man of his wealth, but a ring that was unmistakably, completely her. Simple in its design, extraordinary in its detail, clearly custom-made for exactly the hand it was meant for. I had this made 9 months ago, Lorenzo said. I've been waiting for the right moment. And I keep thinking there's no perfect moment, so I'm just going to do it now with cake on my shirt and our son destroying the garden behind us, because I think that's actually the most honest version of who we are. He looked at her. I love you, Amelia. I loved you in that courtroom when you stood up to a judge that everyone else was terrified of and didn't even blink. I loved you on our wedding day. I loved you through the scared parts and the hard parts and the parts where I was too much and you stayed anyway. I love you now, standing here, and I will love you when we're old and Marco has made us grandparents and everything we've built has grown into something neither of us can fully imagine yet. You are the reason I'm the man I want to be. Will you let me spend the rest of my life being worthy of you? Amelia stared at the ring, then at his face, then at Marco, who had paused his cake destruction to watch them with the focused curiosity of a child who understood something important was happening even if he didn't know what. She looked back at Lorenzo. You already are worthy of me, she said quietly. You've been worthy of me for years. But yes. 1,000 times yes. Put the ring on my finger, Lorenzo. He did. And Marco, sensing that the moment called for enthusiasm even without understanding why, clapped his cake-covered hands together and shrieked with joy. Lorenzo pulled Amelia into his arms, and she felt him laughing, and she laughed too, and Marco shrieked louder, and somewhere in the middle of all of it she felt something settle into place inside her chest. Something that had been quietly searching for a long time. Home. This was home. This improbable, extraordinary, dangerous, and tender life they'd built together was exactly where she was supposed to be. 6 weeks later, she showed him the second positive pregnancy test. Lorenzo sat down. I looked at it. I looked at her. Looked at Marco across the room, who was currently trying to teach the dog to sit by demonstrating the action himself with great enthusiasm. Again, he said. Again, Amelia confirmed. A beat. Then the smile broke across his face, enormous and unguarded, the smile that very few people in the world ever got to see and that Amelia considered one of the great privileges of her life. Good, he said, and reached for her. Good. She went into his arms laughing, and he held her the way he always held her, like something precious, like something chosen, like something he would cross oceans and empty warehouses and entire years of sleepless nights to protect. Because that's what she was. What they were to each other. Not a weakness. Never a weakness. The whole point. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to the Mafia Codes and drop a comment below. Tell me which moment hit you the hardest, because your comments, your likes, your subscriptions are what keep these stories coming. Until next time, besties. Remember, the most powerful people in the room are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes they are the ones standing quietly, waiting for the world to realize its mistake.